Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
I can hardly wait to put forth all the evidence we have collected on Dominion, starting with the fact it was created to produce altered voting results in Venezuela for Hugo Chavez, and then shipped internationally to manipulate votes for purchase in other countries, including this one. It was funded by money from Venezuela and Cuba, and China has a role in it also. We have staggering statistical evidence. We have staggering testimony from witnesses, including one who was personally in briefings when all of this was discussed and planned, beginning with Hugo Chavez and how it was designed there, and then saw it happening in this country. As soon as the state shut down on election night and stopped counting, those are the states where the most egregious problems occurred. We also need to look at, and we're beginning to collect evidence on the financial interests of some of the governors and secretaries of state who actually bought into the Dominion systems to line their own pockets by getting a voting machine in that would either make sure their election was successful or they got money for their family from it. Well, for fraud this serious, I think even if the states are stupid enough to go ahead and certify the votes where we know the machines were operating and producing altered election results, then they will be set aside by the fraud also. I mean, we are talking about hundreds of thousands of votes. President Trump won this election in a landslide.
Welcome back to Whistleblower Wednesday, folks. The Rob Maness Show is live on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast. Well, Venezuela is worse than we ever knew. Stealing elections and killing Americans. And I'm dead serious. Yes, folks. Venezuela used drug cartels, Hezbollah, and U.S. voting systems to attack America, and we know that. We know that because my guest today is extensively covering the facts being revealed from a special team of citizens who have worked on this issue for years. For example, and I'm going to just read a small quote from one of her posts on X, very recent. For example, she reports that, quote, from inside U.S. custody, Hugo Carvajal, the former head of Venezuela's intelligence, just confessed the Maduro regime weaponized drugs as part of a deliberate plan to destabilize the U.S. Cuban operatives, FARC, ELN, and Hezbollah were given weapons, passports, and immunity to operate from Venezuela. They infiltrated under Biden's open border policies, armed, obedient, and ready. Every kidnapping, every extortion, and killing. Acts ordered by the regime. And it doesn't stop there. Carvajal confirms what many suspected, that, quote, Smartmatic was born as an electoral tool of the Venezuelan regime and exported abroad, including to the United States, close quote. He says he oversaw Venezuela's election IT chief and that U.S. elections can be rigged with Smartmatic software. He says the president's actions were justified, President Trump's, and may have underestimated how far the regime in Venezuela will go to stay in power. Carvajal now sits in Rikers Island after extradition, but has become a federal witness in the case against Maduro's narco-terror regime. Close quote from the report. My guest is known as the Savage Queen of Twitter. Emerald Robinson is the host of The Absolute Truth on Lindell TV that was created for Mike by my boss, Brandon House of Worldview Tube, which is why you should watch this network too. And as a former Newsmax and OANN White House correspondent, she often was the only reporter to challenge the insanity of the Biden administration by going head-to-head with Press Secretary Communist Jen Psaki. Emerald is fearless and a warrior for the truth. She fights for we the people while being surrounded by the swamp to this day. And she's my guest. I'm honored to have her. Usually I'm on the end of answering questions, but she's agreed to do this show with me. Emerald, welcome to the Rob Maness Show.
It's great to be with you, Colonel Maness. Thank you so much. I mean, we're flipping the dynamic here a little bit.
But I'm just as uncomfortable because you're one of the few people when you ask questions, they're really hard, and I have to really study hard. So I had to study harder for this episode today than normal. All right, so the reason why I wanted to get you on the show was several weeks ago, I started watching you tweet out these tweets, and they were numbered, but it wasn't a normal thread. And you were breaking news about this small team that I mentioned in my monologue, and that they had spent all this time documenting the realities of election fraud, not just in the United States of America, but in the world, really, and that it had emanated from Venezuela. So. And the really thing that surprised me is that you were talking about the 2024 election initially. And that's why I go, wait a minute, something's going on here.
Right.
And so tell folks a summary of who this team is, because they're still active, and what happened in the 2024 election.
Yeah. Before I get into that, something you said in your cold open struck me. And the video of Sidney Powell, which I remember well. I watched that in real time, right? It took me back. I've been struck as I have put out this thread, and I've been working. So I've been working on this story for over 5 years now, right? But over the last year and a half, I've had a front seat to the people who were trying to do something about what we've known since 2020 and how the 2024 election was saved. But what you said and what Sidney said there, we knew so much of this already. Even November 2020, so much of this we knew. And I love that this is Whistleblower Wednesday. That's great. I've actually had a couple whistleblowers come out of the woodwork since I've been reporting and doing this thread, to talk to me about what we knew leading up to the 2020 election and in the immediate aftermath. We had this intelligence on Venezuela. We had how it intersected with China, even prior to the 2020 election. And one whistleblower and confirming a lot of this, which, I've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours talking to dozens of different people about this story. Of course, there's the main figures in my story that I call the Three Musketeers, and we'll get to them in a minute. But I went and talked to dozens of people to confirm their story all over the globe. Okay. But what this one whistleblower, who was a key person, actually wrote the dissent from the in that Director of National Intelligence report on foreign interference that Ratcliffe put out in 2021. And remember, he said, I got tons of pushback from the intelligence community. People didn't. The analysts did not want me to include China and Chinese interference. This whistleblower, it was him, and he was telling me, we had so much on this, even Smartmatic, and there are classified reports on Smartmatic that existed prior to the 2020 election, the development of the software in Venezuela and how it is used by China, right? They already had that, and they were talking about it in emails. And the person told me, if they just declassified these emails, they might not want to declassify the reports on the intelligence. Okay, understandable, sure. That should be declassified too, but they could legitimately make a case for not doing that. But the emails can be declassified, and the American people would know that the intelligence community knew. So fast forward to 2024. These people knew this. I've been briefed on the Smartmatic issue and how it was developed in Venezuela, how long this had been going on to a certain degree right after the 2020 election. And a lot of it was already there. And I know that there was attempts to brief the Trump team. There were some people who were briefed. So we didn't even have to go through the 4 years of the Biden regime and sucky.
Right.
Because we could have done something about it then. But up to even the summer 2024, nothing had been done. But there was this kind of ragtag band funded by Patrick Byrne, right, that I have now called the Three Musketeers who just wouldn't let it go. Now, two members of my Three Musketeers, former CIA station chief, he's a legendary CIA agent because of what he did in Afghanistan, Gary Burnson.
Yeah.
You probably know him well.
I do.
And then this other non-citizen of the U.S., Venezuelan national, who we call Zorro, have been investigating drug trafficking and money laundering. That's what they did. You know, they were a private group. Gary had long since left the CIA, but in investigating those two issues for different clients, the issue of election stealing was put on their radar as far back as 2012, the Smartmatic issue. So they weren't particularly looking into that, but they'd already had to investigate some of it because of how it related to the money laundering and the drug trafficking by the oligarchs in Venezuela. So they already had a pretty good basis by the time we got to 2020. They had then, after 2020, they knew immediately when they saw what was happening with the 2020 election, they saw it and knew, okay, this is definitely the Smartmatic software. You know, this is that software that's in play. And after 2021, when Biden was installed, and I say installed in the White House because that's what it was, and Trump was no longer in office, they just didn't let it go. They were doing something for, a couple years, and they had already talked to Patrick Byrne in, 2020. Then they got back together. Patrick Byrne funded this effort. And what they began to do was flip whistleblowers in South America, in Venezuela, who had defected, right? Engineers from Smartmatic, an official who had worked at CNE, the Venezuelan elections office, essentially. And they'd flip one, and then they flip another, right? And eventually they ended up with about a dozen. They moved them to Argentina, and they moved them to Switzerland. And that's where they were in 2024 ahead of the US election. They had detailed how they do the steal. They showed them the code in the software, right, that allows for this. They showed exactly how it's done. They took some of this data imaging that they had from our elections and let them look at it and show how they did it. So that Mesa County image, all of that, the Coffee County image, they went through all that. I've talked to these whistleblowers. It's very fascinating to talk with them. And I asked them how far back it went. And so did General Flynn that summer, that he showed up in 2024, the summer 2024, in Stade, Switzerland, to verify that they were legit and that they knew what they were talking about. And he was blown away. Before he left Stade, he asked one of them, he said, well, how long has this been going on? And they tell him, well, 2 decades and 72 countries. 2 decades and 72 countries. That's why no one wants to touch this, Colonel Manus. Still, nothing was being done about the 2024 election, right? There was a major presidential election coming up. We were living under tyranny. J6ers were sitting in prison. People like me were thinking that every helicopter that went over was the day they were coming for me. That's where we sat at this point. A few weeks before the 2024 election, Senator Mark Wade Mullen and former Senator David Perdue finally arranged a meeting between Trump advisor Susie Wiles and that one man who could explain exactly how everything was rigged, and that was Zorro, the Venezuelan national. The meeting took place at Mar-a-Lago. Susie she had said, and she was one of those people telling President Trump, election fraud doesn't exist. You legitimately lost in 2020. This is why we have to do this for 2024. She really thought they were crazy. Okay, she legitimately did. After that briefing, though, she listened, she absorbed it very slowly, but she made the decision that the Trump team should be briefed as well. But first, she sent them to the only person she trusted to confirm it, who happened to be on site at Mar-a-Lago at the time. And you might can guess who that was. It was none other than Elon Musk. So Zorro went to brief Musk. He went to do his full PowerPoint briefing. But Musk doesn't listen to briefings like that, right? He said, just give me your data. He put it in AI. And I know this is long, so if we have to take a commercial break, you can let me know.
Yeah, we're going to take a break here in about 30 seconds. But so set it up. So he briefed Musk.
He briefed Musk.
And Musk took
said,
action.
this is legit. This is what Musk said. He got on a call and he said, we have a problem. it's true.
Who did he tell that
But
to?
he
The
told
president?
that to Susie Wiles. And
Okay.
that began a 3-day period of nonstop briefings for the Trump team. And that was right around October 17th, 2024.
Okay. All right. We got to take a break, Emerald. When we come back, we'll see another little clip. I always use little clips to get cold open.
Okay.
It's about the Venezuela stuff, and now you know why what the clip's going to show you is happening. And this is the reason right here. Emerald Robinson is covering it. The only person really that's a legitimate, independent journalist, folks. You're not following her and watching her show. You ought to be doing it. Shame on you for not doing it. We'll be right back on the Rob Maness Show.
It looks like it's heating up in the Caribbean after a multi-day port call at St. Thomas Island in the Caribbean. The USS Gerald Ford aircraft carrier has been dispatched to the waters just off the coast of Venezuela. They'll join multiple U.S. Navy destroyers, a U.S. Marine amphibious assault vessel, and a Los Angeles-class attack submarine armed with Tomahawk cruise missiles. This comes after multiple open source intelligence accounts on X reported that 6 airborne U.S. refueling aircraft linked to B-52 bombers have taken off. And after thousands of U.S. Marines landed in Puerto Rico and began practicing landing missions in Venezuela like jungle environments. One thing's clear here, folks. These aren't just exercises. It has been decades since the U.S. Southern Command has done anything, anywhere near these levels of assets in their area of responsibility, and it is the largest U.S. military buildup since the invasion of Iraq in 2003, as we said the other day. Our next guest, the senior national security editor at the National Interest, Brandon J. Weichert, tweeted this out last night saying, quote, GPS down in Venezuela and Trinidad, pre-TAC underway. Brandon joins us now. He's also the host of the National Security Hour, which airs every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern on iHeartRadio networks. Brandon, so this GPS going down is a key signal. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so basically, and thanks for having me as always. Basically, it's usually a precursor to a larger military operation. Basically, we want to do is create a blackout of those GPS signals, so Venezuela's armed forces and their missiles and their weapons can't operate as well as they would under normal conditions. Interestingly, there's some people online who are saying they actually think Maduro himself is creating the blackout in order to try to prevent our forces from using GPS over Venezuelan target areas. But in either event, I think we're probably the ones doing it more likely. But in either event, this is usually a very serious indicator, Emerald, that...
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Whistleblower Wednesday. It's not every day I get to use a clip from the show host who I'm interviewing. And the reason why we're interviewing Emerald Robinson today is because she's covering this. And I just wanted to show a little clip of her recent coverage of what's going on off the coast of Venezuela that everybody realizes is happening, but doesn't really understand the why. And that's what this show today is about, and why I wanted to get her on. And yes, it's about drugs too, because they're killing hundreds of thousands of Americans, but it's also about the strategic, vital national interests of the United States and the security of the very thing that makes us a democratic constitutional republic: voting. If we can't have confidence in that, we can't have confidence in anything. And that's why everyone everywhere on both sides of the aisle is questioning everything that comes out of every government at every level in this country right now, which is heartbreaking for people like me and my guest too, Emerald, who serve this country because we love what it means. That it's the greatest country in the world, the greatest country in the history of mankind. It's lifted more people out of poverty, saved more lives from war than any other country, and it's being destroyed from within because of this lack of confidence. We got to get it right. Emerald, welcome back. It was a little bit of a long intro, but I wanted to show that just to remind everybody that the reality of what's happening right now. This is going on.
And speaking of right now, just as we've been talking over the last 20 or so minutes, the president did confirm in his roundtable that's happening right now in the Roosevelt Room that we've just intercepted or taken a seized tanker off the coast of Venezuela. President confirmed that. Yeah. So this is escalating even further. I do wish that the president during this time would take the opportunity to explain why. That it's about more than drug trafficking and even more than Tren de Aragua, which is an egregious breach, to our national security, or was. I mean, we had a paramilitary force invading. I think it's time for the administration to tell the story that I'm telling you, because they have now interviewed these 10 whistleblowers, 2 whistleblowers of the 12, Smartmatic engineers that the 3 Musketeers, Burnson, and Zorro recruited, did leave because they're not under government protection, unfortunately, even to this day.
That's unfortunate.
It's very unfortunate. And you can imagine the targets that are on their back and the backs of their family. So they got very scared. And they left because they felt like the government was going to protect them. And I think that I think it's time to tell the story, because a lot of people are very worried about getting into another conflict. And that's understandable. I think you and I both understand that reservation. We would feel that way too if we didn't know what we knew, right, Colonel Manus?
Oh, absolutely. I think people like me are a lot more comfortable because of my background, and I know a lot more about how the policy's been developed. When you look at the national security strategy he just released, it's evident that the intent is not to have some big ground war, but to reestablish our power vis-a-vis the Monroe Doctrine, the Trump modifier on the Monroe Doctrine, which really just is a reestablishment of America as it's supposed to be, which is one that keeps foreigners out of our hemisphere and helps protect the little countries so they can do their thing, and that kind of influence. In the old days, the Soviet Union, before that, when Monroe Doctrine was being established, the Spanish, the French, all of them, it didn't matter whether they were considered allies in the past or not. We don't want their influence in our hemisphere because they bring death and destruction usually from all of these locations. You were talking about Musk before the break on the 2024 election. So he called Susie Wiles and said, "We've got confirmed we have a problem." Did he do something? Can folks know that he did something and what it was?
Well, the key part of the story, and that it's being retold, embellishing Musk's role, making it as if he was the one who saved the 2024 election himself. That's a bit of a misrepresentation, but he had one of the most important roles, because if he had said, "No, this sounds crazy," or even had said, "It's plausible, right? Maybe, but I'm not sure," then nothing would have happened. And they would have stolen it again. but Musk verified it. And he was so troubled that he went the next day on October 17th, to Pennsylvania. And he held this memorable town hall for 2 hours. And in that town hall, that's when Musk mentioned dimension voting systems and noted that they're coincidentally in battleground areas like Maricopa County, Arizona, and they're in Pennsylvania, and that they've been proven to be vulnerable. He let the world know. He kind of let you know. He said they've been rigging U.S. elections. He said that. He was also part of arranging he arranged one of his tech people to be briefed over the next 3 days, along with other figures in, the Trump world and national security. So Zorro stayed at Mar-a-Lago for 3 days and briefed. Not only did he brief, but they brought in the whistleblowers via a video conferencing line over the 3 days to brief multiple people. So they were in Shaw, Switzerland, right? But they video conferenced and told them, this is how it works. This is exactly how it is. But also, another interesting part of this story is that they had IP addresses, okay? And the whistleblowers had verified the IP addresses that routed, through to Serbia.
Okay.
They had these because essentially a Japanese blogger had been live tweeting during the 2020 election with, saying that he had U.S. IP data, election data that included IP addresses. A member of the team for the Three Musketeers who was responsible for research had found this like a couple years ago. And Zorro didn't pay much attention to it because he's like, well, what would a Japanese blogger have this information? He just didn't think it sounded very likely. And then the researcher kept bugging him and bringing it up to him and saying, I don't know, I think you should reach out to this guy. What kind of checks out? Let's reach out to this guy. So they did. The Three Musketeers reached out to him on a DM. The guy, the Japanese blogger, who's, you and I, knowing what we know about how this works, probably Japanese intel, right? Because, who's doing that? Yeah. Right. Only asked for $15 in Bitcoin, too. That's also interesting, right? Didn't want much. And he immediately sends a Dropbox link. This all happens in a matter of minutes. The whistleblowers check it out, and that is exactly what they need. So all of this is given to, the U.S., the people in the U.S., and that's trying to figure out how do we deal with this. Now, this is where it's still kind of been kept under wraps a little bit. This is how it was told to me. I was told that Senator Mullen comes to the rescue again, but not with much more detail, other than there is a group of contractors, DOD contractors, that are within their duty to deal with cybersecurity threats to the United States, right? Based on that 2015 executive order that we've talked a lot about since 2020, that was able to mitigate the threat that was posed by the Belgrade, Serbia office of Dominion. That's where the IP addresses. So there were 3 confirmations for that Serbia operation. Okay. 3 different independent confirmations. Right. There's the emails from lawsuits between Dominion workers in Serbia and Dominion workers in the U.S. and Canada. Those have been publicly released by Barry County Sheriff Darleaf, some of those. So those are available for you to go check out. Okay. There was also a Macedonian intelligence asset that was sourcing on that with the Three Musketeers. And then there was this IP information. So they knew where it was happening, but they didn't quite know how they would stop it. Zorro meets with the contractors. He gives everything over. This is a matter of, a few days before the 2024 election.
So this is in the Biden administration, folks, just so you understand. We still have Americans that want to protect our country.
There are some, yeah. Yeah. And so he goes to Oslo, Norway, because obviously, if the election doesn't go well, these guys are basically dead men, and probably quite a few of us. Bernstein goes back to Switzerland, and Bern is in Qatar for their safety, because they know they're just, there's target on their backs too. So nobody knows what's going to happen. Team Trump doesn't know what's going to happen. They understand that they can be flipped. They now know how. They've spoken with the Venezuelan whistleblowers who were involved with the development of the software. They explained to Also, if you go to the website stolenelections.com, you can see the players. And not only was, when Smartmatic was developed in 2004 for the Chavez referendum to rig it, there were, the key people, the engineers that were involved with it. When Smartmatic took over acquired Sequoia in the United States, those people, several of those people moved to work for Sequoia. Then when Dominion got Sequoia, right, those people, like Ronald Morales is a name, moved to Dominion. So there's also the people. There's the software, there's the people. So that's how they knew that Dominion was basically the same software, right? You had the same people, you had the licensing disputes over the years. When the whistleblowers looked at it, they felt like they knew that they, that this was it, that it looked the same. And then there was the backdoor entry because they created it, right? So and used it. So they all knew. But what happened? 2024 rolls around. I remember sitting there after 7 p.m. Eastern time when usually we start seeing the flips. You start seeing those numbers that don't really.
I was watching.
And that you were watching. We all were. I remember talking to Ed Dowd, who was in Hawaii, and he's like, "Wait, what's going on?" He just couldn't even believe it because he knew they could do it, but we were not seeing the numbers switch, and we were all anticipating that because we didn't know anything was going on. Trump himself did not know. If he knew it could happen, but he didn't know. And they kind of kept him at arm's length, right? Because they didn't want there to be any propriety or questions. So he was briefed to a certain extent then. He's been fully briefed now. He knows exactly now. But then it was kind of, to make sure, there was he was kept at a distance. And he knew what he needed to know, could know. Now, Benny Johnson, who is telling the other version of the story that doesn't quite line up, right? He came out and independently confirmed that this is all true. He talked to probably Elon Musk and a few other figures, said that Elon knew a little bit earlier in the day that obviously the Belgrade threat had been neutralized because the numbers were adding up to him. And he could just tell because that's what he does, right? He's a tech person. He could see that there was no manipulation. And he told Trump a little bit earlier, like around 7 p.m., you're going to win. But I've heard that Trump really started to absorb it and think, wait, maybe they did, maybe this is going to happen around after 10 p.m. Because we would have already been seeing a little bit more of the flip in certain areas or the holding out on votes. And so still nobody quite knew what happened.
I got to take a break real quick. We're a little late on the break. So let me take this break real quick. We'll be right back because the story about what happened in the 2024 election is very important. And I'll add my 2 cents there after the break. We'll be right back.
News is moving faster than ever, and so are we. Worldview Tube brings you 24/7 live stream coverage and now real-time alerts when it matters most. Once you have the Worldview Tube app installed, exit the app and navigate your way to Settings. In Settings, locate the tab labeled Notifications. Select the Notifications tab. Scroll down until you locate the Worldview Tube app icon. Select the tab, and here you can turn on and customize your notification experience for the Worldview Tube app. News doesn't wait, and neither should you. Turn on push notifications to stay informed. Every headline as it happens.
That's huge. That's 2 huge bombshells right now. But I can't ignore the third. You just told us that you are CIA, sir. So how would you describe your role with the CIA, which you haven't revealed before?
Well, again, I was telling the truth when I said they frequently was reminded that you have a really non-standard relationship. You have that. It became kind of my mother relationship. I had lots of relationships across the government, but eventually I went from there to by 2010, 2011, Obama, I became something called a tier 1 intelligence asset. And then in 2010, 2011, Obama elevated me to national intelligence asset. I was told I was going to be the ace in the hole for all kinds of, for the real tough situations from 2010, that was after working for Brennan for 4 or 5 years. And then I continued doing all that stuff through 2016. And all this crazy stuff happened that I've told you about, where we set up the Russian hoax. That's why, I mean, I've talked around it because I was trying to hide that, but I've told these stories about how I got drawn into setting up the Russian hoax and the Hillary this and that. There was a little bit of fibbing there. I didn't want to explain the whole truth. I was doing that. I didn't just stumble into it. I was their go-to asset. I was the national intelligence asset. First, I got pulled under Brennan in 2006, and then 20.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. That was Emerald Robinson, my guest today, interviewing Patrick Byrne, who broke that news about him being a CIA asset on the air. And that's important because Mr. Byrne is somewhat controversial in some people's minds. But to understand the background of this man is to understand why he's been smeared and those kinds of things. And it's relevant to the story that Emerald has been covering for 5 years. That's breaking now about the election fraud that is ongoing in 72 countries, she said. 72 countries. Emerald, welcome back. I wanted to show that clip because I wanted to get into the role of the CIA just a little bit from your perspective and what you know. Mm-hmm. But before that, it's election night. I'm down at the community center, West Palm Beach Community Center, where the big watch party was. I'm being interviewed by a couple of people, but I Cliff Maloney from the Pennsylvania Chase is a friend of mine, and my PAC did some funding for him for ballot chasing. So I'm on the phone with him a couple of times, and I asked him outright at about 9:30. I said, "Hey, what's going on?" Because I'm like everybody else. I'm like, man, they're going to steal it, but I'm not seeing any numbers that would indicate that the steal is on again. And he said, "Look, Rob, at like 9 o'clock Eastern, they had already had all of the red counties counted in Pennsylvania. He's won it, but they're not announcing it."
Yeah,
is what I was hearing from Cliff, and he was on the ground there.
They'll say
that's when I go. That's when I go. They're waiting on something. Were they waiting on something? Is that what was going on?
Probably, yeah, they were waiting on something. But also in Pennsylvania, there were 700,000 less mail-in ballots in 2024 than there was in the 2020 election cycle. That helped, right? Because election fraud is death by 1,000 cuts, but they can flip it. They weren't able to flip it. And I'll tell you what happened, as it's been told to me, is that basically they took out the power in the blocks surrounding the Belgrade office. They fried, the power, so they couldn't get on to their computer the day before. So they stopped it the day before. It was out for 3 days, meaning they couldn't then later. So they knew it was not going to be rolling in on the portion that they flipped. So that's how it was saved. Now, there were other things, like I said, the 700,000 mail-in ballots that weren't there in 2024, but they still could have flipped it for her enough to make her win. You remember they have a certain amount of the market share, but they could have flipped it enough to give us a Kamala Harris administration, which would have been an absolute nightmare. Absolutely. And now getting back to what the clip you just played about, that Byrne said, it is literally caused a firestorm on X. And staying true to form, Patrick Byrne is still controversial. He's basically told you this in the past, right? Because he'd already shared his story about how the Obama administration had ordered him to bribe Hillary Clinton because they knew she was going to be the president, right? They just knew she was going to be president. And Obama wanted to be able to control her because while they're busy trying to control Republicans, they're also busy trying to control each other. And he wanted to make sure that his agenda survived Hillary Clinton and his legacy, right? Obama was. Right. So basically, Burns told you this. And how else most average Americans don't know how to go out and flip whistleblowers and go around the world and get a security team to protect them, So I would just say he kind of knew this. And also because of his background, he was able to know what to do. And there are a few, there are a few good guys in that, not many though. I'd say 80% of them are still loyal to Brennan, who brought them in. Our IC, the IC as it stands now was basically built by Brennan. And that's one of our major problems.
Exactly.
That hasn't changed since Trump took office. And that's a whole other hour-long conversation we could have. But how did you think, I mean, Gary Burns is a former CIA station chief and a legendary CIA agent who went in and basically would have taken out the Taliban by himself.
Exactly.
A matter of days if he'd gone to backup from Rumsfeld. And if the Bush, the Bush Department of Defense didn't want an ongoing war, you probably would have had, a shorter, thanks to Gary Burns. So these guys knew what they were doing because they've been part of this. But that's been something that's been interesting to see the comments on X. And I understand people because I understand the distrust of anyone who's been a part of our intelligence community because it is so corrupt. Yeah. So I get that. But there's more to come on that story. Burns going to be back on tomorrow and we'll go through the comments.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, when I think about him, he was the Overstock guy, CEO, and most people, that's what they think about. And then there was something with the Second Amendment lady from Russia and stuff, and all that. There's a documentary I think that General Flynn's team put together on his life.
It's really good.
That people should go see. Right, I've seen clips of it, and it's really well done. And everything, but
isn't it called The Enemy Within? It's very good, and it's actually just entertaining. Even if you didn't know it was a real story, it's very entertaining. And I will tell you, all along when Patrick would tell me stuff, he would be adamant. He's like, "But you go check for yourself," because he understands that his story sounds so fantastical that people generally don't believe him. And so he would say, and I would call. I mean, I called up. You can't believe the people that I've spoken to and called up. And sometimes I would think, this sounds, a little too much for TV even. And I would call a very trusted source or somebody who was supposed to have been involved. They would confirm details for me. Mm-hmm. So while people, will say these things, oh, well, he's a CIA asset. I have went around and confirmed because that is my training. That is what I do. I am a journalist. And I understand why people are also critical, skeptical about journalists as well, because it's another institution that has become super corrupt and you just can't. We're now in a low trust society, Colonel Manus.
Yes, we are.
Which is just a sad state of affairs, because I spent a lot of time in a couple former Soviet bloc countries. And when you get into a low trust society, it's hard to get yourself out of it.
I've done a couple of rants about that very subject today. It's very frustrating for those of us that have risked our lives defending the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, the whole concept, and our forefathers and mothers and our grandkids' future and all that. And in our society, we can't trust anything from anybody in government or the corporate media or a corporation at this point. And that is a very, very dangerous situation, which is why I think this story is important. I'm going to have to take one last break here, but before we go to the next segment, but just to set it up, the story is important, and it includes so many things that folks just aren't aware of, because we have a tendency to live in our little hometown communities and try to just live our lives and take care of our kids and grandkids and our immediate family and extended families. And we don't want this to be true, I think, is what's kind of happening in the American psyche today. But this next clip, after this break, you're going to see something about Tina Peters. And I wanted to get you to talk about why she is important to this entire story, because this picture is very big, and you got to understand it, folks, because to understand it is to find a way to a solution that reestablishes trust in the society of America. And that's critically important for our survival. We'll be right back with Emerald Robinson.
You woke up with a sore throat and a low-grade fever. You know you are getting sick, so here's your choices. You can get sicker and miss work, try to see a doctor this week, or sit hours in a crowded waiting room at urgent care.
I have a smarter option for you. Open your medical emergency kit. Match your symptoms to doctor-recommended prescription in your booklet and take the right meds now and get well faster.
This is not a first aid kit. It's like having an urgent care in your home. It includes doctor-prescribed medications to treat over 39 medical issues like respiratory infections, strep throat, pneumonia, UTIs, and more.
No waiting to see the doctor and no standing in line at the pharmacy. It's right here.
Every home should have at least one medical emergency kit, and here's how to order.
Go to worldviewhealthcare.com. Your kit to treat dozens of common and serious illnesses is rushed to your door. worldviewhealthcare.com. That's worldviewhealthcare.com.
The emergency kit available at worldviewhealthcare.com. Make sure you don't have to go to urgent care. I got pneumonia. I didn't have to go. I took this last year. Stayed at home, went to bed.
I'm calling on President Trump, and I did that in an X post last night on Getter, not because she's 70, not because she's a Gold Star mom, and not because she's likely to die in prison, but because Tina Peters is a witness to the 2020 theft of an election. The president, as chief magistrate, could send the marshals into the Colorado prison. There are federal custodial witness protection programs that you could put Tina Peters under that would supersede Colorado law. You could take her to Washington, D.C. You could put her up in, this would be what I would do anyway, put her up in Blair House for a few weeks while she recovers. Then I would depose somebody or put someone from the Justice Department or the Assistant Secretary over at DHS, Dave Harvillitz, and I would use her as a witness as we're investigating the 2020 election. She is a witness to that. It looks to me and to many others like there was foreign interference in that 2020 election. There are national security implications to that and to any future elections. And so the perfectly sensible thing to do would be to use the power of the law such that the president has today as chief magistrate and get her out of that solitary confinement. Not to free her, don't supersede Colorado law in that sense, put her to work. She knows things. She fought for those things. And use those parts of your government, Mr. President, that want to investigate the 2020 election, which you yourself believe was stolen. Use Tina Peters to help with it.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Whistleblower Wednesday, and that right there, the question is why is it important for them to keep Tina Peters in a prison that's not a federal prison, so not controlled by the United States government, that's now under the direction and authority of the executive, that's Donald J. Trump? Why is that? And my guest today is Emerald Robinson, who's really, I think, probably the only person in the journalism profession that understands the whole picture of this and why it's important. And it's why I started this show with Sidney Powell from 2020, saying the same things that Emerald's reporting and investigation is confirming today, and Tina Peters is still in prison. Why is it important for them to keep them there, keep her there, Emerald? And then what needs to be done for us to get to a solution on this issue, because it's critically important. Welcome back.
Thank you, Colonel. Tina Peters is a political hostage because, as Brian Kennedy accurately laid out, and I did so very well there on War Room, she is very dangerous for them because she is a firsthand witness to a major crime, and she was a witness in an official government capacity. She was the Mesa County elections clerk.
Yeah.
She was doing her job. The federal mandate states that she must retain the data, the election records, the election information for 22 months. She was preserving it. She was doing her job. And without the corporate media helping to malign her and a fake narrative that they're spinning, she is a huge witness in what we're talking about. And the data she preserved has been helpful for the Venezuelan whistleblowers, and now for ODNI, right, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, who's interviewed these whistleblowers, other ongoing government investigations, federal government cases, right, related to this that maybe we don't hear much about for, reasons. she's essential to this because she was in an official capacity and she did exactly what she was supposed to do. Now, how do we resolve this? I tend to agree with Brian. I think you're going to have to bring in the U.S. Marshals because she is a hostage. And this very blue communist Colorado governor is not going to play ball because I'm sure he's being instructed by somebody and he knows that they cannot let Tina out because she is detrimental to their efforts to overtake the U.S. I know President Trump understands this, but it's getting his other people on board with this. When is this going to happen? It's no day too soon because Tina's in not great health. She's being targeted and harassed. She is currently in solitary confinement. A 70-year-old woman with health, after her writ of habeas corpus was denied, she's thrown back in the hole. And after that presidential pardon letter, and you can't tell me that's a coincidence. It's total retaliation for her team trying to secure her freedom. They're saying it's for her own safety, but we know how it's psychological warfare on her. Being in the hole, even for a day. I've talked to many prisoners who've been put in the hole for, certain amounts. It's a lot of the J6ers. Even for a day plays with your mind, let alone for multiple days.
I spoke to Enrique Terrio over the weekend. He said he was in solitary for 3 years. I'm amazed that guy is in as good a shape physically and mentally that he is, and he's in great shape. But imagine that 3 years in a concrete coffin, essentially. I can't imagine being 70 years old and not in great health anyway, and then going through it's in and out too. It seems like every time her team does something that the Colorado prison folks don't like, they punish her.
They immediately
do. It's unbelievable. We got a little bit of time left. So the machines. Look, I did an interview with a guy named Dennis Haw. He's a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, Air Force Academy graduate, supercomputer programmer, computer scientist, designed software for Mars rovers, flight control software, was still working when he died a little bit over a year ago suddenly. But he did a study on behalf of Texas when they were looking at taking on digital machines. And I did a show with him in early 2020 to talk about his report and everything. And so I'm a computer programmer from way back from my college days where I learned it and have a solid understanding that all of this stuff is penetrable. It's modifiable. And with today's technology, it's modifiable even without any kind of wireless internet connection if you can get the right devices with the right information in the right locations. And Dennis proved that in his report. And then we come up to today in 2024, and you have confirmed, and Gary Burnson and Mr. Byrne and Zorro have all confirmed that what we have been talking about is true. We were censored. They destroyed my YouTube channel, my show channel, because of interviews with Dennis Haw about the election before the election. It's crazy because so it's about the machines. There's Chinese equipment, including chips in those machines.
The hardware.
So there is a China connection. It's accurate. What do we do to get this problem solved for the American people so that we can get on the road to rebuilding faith in the institutions that we all once had faith in?
I'm glad you brought up the China hardware because I do think a little bit we have to be careful of getting lost in just Venezuela, right?
Right.
The red-green axis comes together in Venezuela in our hemisphere. You got Hezbollah there, you got China there, Russian involvement. Russia's even sent some backup, a bit of support to Venezuela with the moves from Trump's military, from the U.S. military. And there's so I think that's something we need to start laying out next is how does this all intersect? And I've started doing that a bit now. I just had to get the story of 2024 out. And in the Smartmatic superseding indictment that was just filed not long ago in the Southern District of Florida, in the bribery and corruption case related to the Philippines, there was actually a really important piece in there that a lot of people haven't noticed. It was related to vendor A, and that deals with the manufacturers, which are Taiwan, right? But it's really coming from China being passed through Taiwan, and that's mentioned a bit in the indictment. So that ball is rolling a bit on that too.
Okay.
Right? It's just no one's really looked at it yet, and that's involved with the bribery and corruption case related to the Philippines, but we're going to learn a lot more through that on how it operates the globe and how they're tied together with China and how it intersects. And one of the key figures for Smartmatic named Ronald Morales, who's also worked at Sequoia and Dominion, there's he visited, he's made multiple trips besides, Venezuela, his home country, to China and Serbia. And Sheriff Darleaf released some of that information. He's a great follow on X. He doesn't go out there and do media, but from time to time, he'll release these really important information from his investigation on his X. What do? We have to get rid of the machines. And that does not involve renaming and rebranding, which is the effort we're currently seeing.
Yeah.
In fact, it was really funny. We're talking about Liberty Vote and how they've acquired Dominion, and they're going to clean it up, right? They're not going to be connected to the internet. Sure, they're not going to be connected to the internet. They're going to be able to test them. Okay, yeah, right. So the company that's buys Dominion and now is renaming as Liberty Vote, they came up. It was No Inc. and a Scott Leyendecker. We all say it a different way.
Yeah,
everybody's still trying to figure out how to say this. How to figure out how to say his last name. Well, this No Inc. comes up yesterday in the state election board meetings for Georgia, where they're talking about, still the sort of the 2020 election. And No Inc.'s technology is for poll pads, right? It's poll pad software. Well, the official testifying yesterday accidentally lets the cat out of the bag, saying, "Oh, they can be remotely accessed." So she's like, "Oh, No Inc. accessed it remotely and wiped all of that." And then when one of the board members said, "Wait, you mean it can be remotely accessed?" Then the woman realizes what she's done and what she said. So that's the company buying Dominion.
There you go.
So there are no electronic machines. Don't let them tell you he's a conservative. Who cares? I don't care if conservatives own the machines. They can be hacked. Anytime it's electronic, they can be hacked. We need to go to same day, in-person voting, paper ballots, counting that day, hand counted in the precinct, right? With lots of observers, and then reported back to the state level. Because in Georgia, let's just take Georgia, for instance, again, they're sending off their data or whatever information to the state level, and the state's telling that precinct what their results were. How does that make any sense?
Yeah, this whole centralized thing is just rife with fraud.
Counting.
Even without the electronics, centralizing this thing is rife with fraud. The best way to do it is exactly like you said: same day voting, max extent possible. Military, obviously absentee, and some rare other ones, invalids and those kind of things. But same day voting, paper ballots, hand counting in the precinct it's voted in. No more centralized counting facilities, because the more you move them, the more the risk increases. Well, Emerald, we're out of time. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Tell folks where to find you real quick, and I will get you back to because I want to do a show on the CIA, because John Ratcliffe's name and Gina Haspel's name that keeps coming up and keeps coming up, and we've got to get to the bottom of this personnel thing, because personnel is policy. Go ahead.
Yep, you can find me, my Substack, emerald.tv. You can see me every day on lindeltv.com or download the app to your device at noon Eastern every day, encore at 8 p.m. Eastern. Of course, you can follow me on X too, where I'm known to be a bit feisty, at Emerald Robinson.
Thank you, Emerald. God bless you. And let's all pray for Tina Peters and this team that they stay safe. We appreciate what you guys are doing, and we'll see you later. Tomorrow's Truth Thursday, and Sean Mahoney of the Space Frontier Foundation is going to be here. We're going to talk about the new NASA administrator and the way to Mars and beyond into the final frontier. I'll see you then.